Hello, I am Eddie O'Sullivan, and this is This Week in the Italian Campaign.
In This Week in the Italian Campaign, the Allied advance to the 22nd of September 1943, the story of the 4 Days of Naples uprising, the beginning of the deportation of Italy's Jews, and The Savage Storm, a new book about the Italian campaign published this week. After the battle for Salerno, the Fifth Army linked up with the Eighth Army, which was advancing from the south. The Allied front line on the 22nd of September extended from south of Naples to Bari on the Adriatic coast, which had been captured that day. The Eighth Army had advanced from the toe of Italy on a limited number of modern roads through South Italy. The area was defended by little more than a single paratroop division, and as they withdrew, they destroyed roads and other infrastructure, leaving behind small units with light weapons to slow the Allies. In mid-September, 15th Army Group Commander General Alexander defined the Allied objectives: the seizing of certain vital areas which contain groups of all-weather airfields, ports and centres of road communications. On these firm bases, the armies can be regrouped, reorganized and balanced, and from them strong offensive operations can be developed to destroy the German forces in the field. Light mobile forces and patrols will be operating ahead of these bases against the enemy continuously. And this advanced screen harasses the hostile rearguards, obtains information of all nature, and aids us to keep the initiative. Alexander's plan called for the capture of Naples, the largest port in southern Italy, and the Foggia airfields near the Adriatic coast. This would be followed by the seizure of Rome and the key road and rail centre of Terni, 90 kilometres northeast of Italy's capital. The third phase would involve taking Livorno, Florence and Arezzo. There was no time schedule, but the Allies hoped Italy's capital would fall by the end of 1943. What they couldn't control was the German reaction. The plan favoured by Erwin Rommel, commander of Army Group B based in northern Italy since mid-August, was for the Germans to retire to a strong defence line extending from Pisa to Pesaro. This approach had initially been approved by Hitler. The Allies assumed that the Germans would rapidly withdraw north. But the defensive battle fought by the 10th Army at Salerno was interpreted by German Supreme Commander South Albert Kesselring as proof the Allies could be contained in southern Italy. 10th Army under General Wichtenhoff was ordered to retire to a defensive line that followed the Volturno River, 80 kilometers north of Salerno, destroying roads and bridges and stripping the countryside of food as it did. The Allied invasion of the mainland and the armistice marked the start of a terrible new era for Italy. Violence previously confined to the battlefield erupted as the Italian army was disarmed and German military rule imposed. On the 10th of September, a German flotilla tried to enter Piombino on the Ligurian coast, 250 kilometers north of Rome, but was blocked by the port authorities. Fighting broke out that night between German forces and Italian coastal battery units, tanks and the civilian population. The German attack was repelled. By dawn on the 11th of September, 120 Germans had been killed and 200 to 300 captured. Piombino surrendered and was occupied on the 12th of September. Sailors, soldiers and civilians fled and formed partisan formations. Lacking clear directions, Resistance by the Italian armed forces was muted, but there were exceptions. Italy had occupied most of Greece since the spring of April 1941. The Acqui division stationed in Cephalonia refused to disarm. After a 10-day battle, which started on the 15th of September, the Germans executed more than 5,000 members of the division in retaliation. This terrible event was described in Captain Morelli's Mandolin, a novel by Louis Bernier, published in 1994. The most dramatic first expression of resistance in Italy itself came in Naples after Allied landings at Salerno on the 9th of September. The seeds of the explosion had been sown for more than 3 years. The first Allied bombing attack on the city came in June 1940. In 1942, the Allies changed from bombing that prioritised military objectives to targeting infrastructure, industry and civilian morale. At the end of the year, US high-altitude B-24 Liberators started daytime attacks. Conditions were so bad that schools were closed on the 7th of December. There were a total of 100 Allied bombing attacks in 1943, almost one a day. On the 4th of August 1943, the largest raid by 400 Flying Fortress aircraft targeted Naples submarine base. The last on the morning of 8th of September came a few hours before the announcement of the armistice. By then, half the city's population of 1 million had fled to avoid the bombs. The devastation, homelessness, and food and fuel shortages were compounded by military occupation. It led to the first major uprising in Western Europe against the Third Reich. On the 12th of September, soldiers were attacked and some killed on the streets of Naples, following attempts to deport Neapolitans and soldiers for forced labour. German military commander of the Naples area, Colonel Walter Schirl, declared a curfew and a state of siege. With immediate action from today, I assume the absolute control with full powers of the city of Naples and the surrounding areas. Every single citizen who behaves calmly will enjoy my protection. On the other hand, anyone who openly or surreptitiously acts against the German armed forces will be executed. Moreover, the home of the miscreant and its immediate surroundings will be destroyed and reduced to ruins. Every German soldier wounded or murdered will be avenged 100 times. I order a curfew from 8 to 6 o'clock in the morning. Only in case of alarm will it be allowed to use the road in order to reach the nearest shelter. A state of siege is proclaimed. Within 24 hours, all weapons and ammunition of any kind, including shotguns, hand grenades, etc., must be surrendered. Anyone who after that period is found in possession of a weapon will be immediately executed. The delivery of weapons and ammunition shall be made to the German military patrols. People must keep calm and act reasonably. The crackdown was immediate. It involved arrests, executions, and deportations. The withdrawal of Germany's 10th Army following the Battle of Salerno intensified the crisis in Naples. On the 22nd of September, the Bagnoli shipyard was destroyed. Schirl announced that men aged 18 to 33 were to be deported to work in North Italy and Germany. Thousands went into hiding and joined the resistance. On the 23rd of September, Schirl ordered the evacuation of an area of up to 300 meters from the waterfront in a prelude to the port's destruction as the Germans prepared to abandon the city. Almost 250,000 people were forced from their homes. On the 26th of September, protesters opposed to Nazi roundups freed men who had been arrested for deportation. They were joined by former Italian soldiers. A full-scale uprising erupted the next day. Tanks and artillery were used to suppress resistance fighters, and there were summary executions. The rebellion climaxed on the 30th of September. Shirl had by then lost control of Naples and accepted the offer of safe conduct out of the city in exchange for those who had been arrested. As German forces left, the city's priceless historical archive was set on fire. At 9:30 the next morning, patrols of the King's Dragoon Guards, followed by the Royal Scots Greys, reinforced by troops of the 82nd Airborne Division, entered a ruined city. It was by then without electricity, water, and a functioning sewage system. The fishing fleet was burned, and every ship in Naples port sunk. A rail tunnel into Naples was blocked by crashing two trains head-on. Coal stockpiles were ignited and served as beacons for Luftwaffe bombers. Naples' ordeal continued long after liberation. The majority of its population depended upon Allied food handouts for months. It became the target of German air attacks, and by the end of the war, Naples was Italy's most heavily bombed city. Many of its cultural buildings, including churches, have been destroyed. More than 500 Neapolitans died in what is known as the 4 Days of Naples uprising, but at least 20,000 of the city's residents are estimated to have lost their lives during the war, mainly due to bombing. At the beginning of the 20th century, Jews were a well-integrated minority in Italy. Anti-Semitism was not part of the ideology or program of the fascist regime of Benito Mussolini, though in 1926 it ordered the expulsion of foreign gypsies. This changed on the 14th of July 1938 with the promulgation by the Council of Ministers of the Charter of Race, a statement that echoed the sentiment of Germany's 1935 race laws. It declared that Italians were Aryans and superior to Semites, Hamites, Black Africans, and other non-Europeans. In November 1938, Royal Decree No. 1728 restricted the civil rights of Italian Jews, banned books written by Jewish authors, and excluded Jews from public offices and higher education. Jews were stripped of their assets and banned from marrying Aryan Italians. After war started in June 1940, concentration camps were opened to hold political prisoners and around 2,200 Jews of foreign nationality. From September 1940, Romani people of Italian nationality were held in designated camps. Italy opened camps in occupied Greece and Yugoslavia that held more than 100,000 people, but Jews in occupation zones were protected, and they became known as the Promised Land. Following Mussolini's fall, camp inmates were gradually released. Following the 8th Army landings on the mainland, hundreds of Jewish refugees imprisoned in southern Italy were freed. About 45,000 Jews were in Italy, and around 8,000 were in Rome when the armistice was announced on the 8th of September. German military rule was declared 3 days later. Action against Italy's Jews began almost immediately. On the 16th of September, the Jewish population of Merano in the Italian Tyrol was deported. On the 22nd, Jews in the Lake Maggiore area near the Swiss border were rounded up. The following day, Germany's chief of the Reich Security Main Office, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, ordered the deportation of Jews from Nazi-occupied nations, including Italy. On Sunday, the 26th of September, SS Chief in Rome, Major Herbert Kappler, delivered a 36-hour ultimatum to the city's Jewish community. This required the payment of 50 kilos of gold and 100 million lire in cash to avoid the mass arrest and deportation to concentration camps of Rome's Jews. The chief rabbi of Rome appealed for help from Pope Pius XII, who ordered the Vatican City Treasury to deliver the gold, Some probably melted down from sacred vessels, but this was only temporary relief. On the 16th of October, Rome's historic Jewish ghetto was entered, and more than 1,000 Jews were taken from their homes. 2 days later, they were loaded onto a train bound for Auschwitz. Only 16 survived. Deportation spread to Trieste, Genoa, Florence, Milan, Venice, and Ferrara. Government officials and the church helped and hid Jews, ensuring the majority survived the war. Nevertheless, by May 1945, 25% of Italy's pre-war Jewish population had been murdered. And now we are going to discuss The Savage Storm, a new book about the Italian campaign published this month by James Holland.
Well, hello. We're now going to discuss this book. Let me just show you a few things about it before I bring my guest in to explain it. It's a book called The Savage Storm by James Holland. It's a very substantial book. It's got 565 pages, 16 pages of pictures, 102 pictures, no less. There are 8 pages of maps, very detailed maps, 8 photo pages, and about 8 pages setting out the principal personalities of the story. The book covers the period from the mainland, basically the preparation for the landings in the mainland in September. So it starts in August, goes to the end of 1943. So it basically covers the mainland campaign in Italy up until Christmas of 43. It's got very detailed sources, and it's a very substantial piece of work. Now I'm going to be joined by my colleague and my brother, Richard O'Sullivan, who's based in Windsor. Hello, Richard.
Good evening.
Good. So just a few things about the book. I mean, this is my opinion, and I haven't read it all in detail because it was only published on Tuesday. So that was on the 21st of September. But it's got excellent narrative history, very solid military history. James Holland knows what he's talking about when he's talking about military history. So he gets the ranks right. He knows about the technology. He's very strong on the Air Force. So he's really authoritative from that point of view. What makes it really interesting is that he's prioritized accounts that were written at the time. So he's forswearing using memoirs written after the war. He's preferred to use the accounts, diaries, and letters that were used at the time, and we'll come to that in a minute. And then he's also got multiple perspectives. So he's obviously got the British, he's got the Americans, he's got the Italians and the Germans and others. So altogether, it's a very powerful piece of work, which is more than pure history, it's more than military history, and it's got a freshness and a vividness. And the publisher, a very good one, is the Penguin Random House, so it's a high quality piece of work. I think this is James's 13th or 14th book that he's done, so it's quite a substantial piece of work. So I heard him speak at the National Army Museum this week just before the publication date was the official publication date. And he made some very interesting points, broad points, which I think one of the reasons why the book is really compelling. The first thing, the obvious point, which many historians have made, is that the Allied campaign in the mainland was half-hearted. There was a difference of opinion between the Americans and the British. But really, it was to do with Churchill. Churchill really believed that Italy and the Mediterranean was a soft underbelly, and he was very confident that Rome would fall very quickly, and this would open the door for an invasion into Europe through Italy and through the Balkans. So it was hard, but the Americans were never convinced of this argument, and they said, okay, you can do the mainland attack, but we're not going to give you the kind of resources that you even had when you were operating in Sicily. So in every area, the resources available for the landings by the 8th Army on the 2nd in the toe of Italy, and then in Salerno on the 9th, were actually altogether, smaller than that we used for the Operation Husky. The other point was that Rome was the main target. That real hope, the Churchillian hope, was that Rome would go and this would be a great triumph. But in strategic terms, it was the Foggia airfields, and we'll come to that in our discussion, I'm sure. Anyway, the other point was that there was confusion on the German side, and that you had a conflict between Rommel, who had been appointed to be commander of Army Group B. Army Group B is a group of armies, so it's more than one. And I think he saw himself to an extent as being the supreme military commander in Italy of all German armies. And he was based in North Italy, and he had he had preference for the abandonment of southern Italy. And in fact, Hitler was preparing to announce that as a policy on the 9th of September when the Salerno landings took place, and that threw this idea into the air, and it was basically dropped, not completely, but at least it was qualified. So you've got Rommel's position, he's in northern Italy, but then you've got the Kesselring view, and Kesselring's position that he was supreme commander south, a bit confusing about who really was in charge. He had a personal line into Hitler, as Rommel did, and he was of the view that it would that the German army could actually slow down the Allied advance, and he commanded General Wichtenhoff, who was the commander of the 10th Army, which was the main force. It was the force in southern Italy, was the 10th Army, whereas Rommel was in the north with other forces. But the 10th Army was under Wichtenhoff. Wichtenhoff was reporting to Kesselring. So there was a bit of a mess from the German point of view right from the beginning. The other point is the Salerno landings, which started on the 9th. It's quite clear, under-resourced, didn't have enough landing craft, which meant they couldn't get enough men on shore. The area was not great because it was overlooked by mountains, and the German tactic was to hold the high points and bombard and counterattack using tanks principally, but not to actually fight on the beaches. And this was really quite effective. What saved the operation in the main was actually naval gunfire. In the end, that was critical. But on the other hand, the fact that the German 10th Army moved more than 5 divisions into the area, stripped resources from Apulia or eastern Italy, which allowed the 8th Army to advance practically unopposed right up the coast of Bari and beyond before they encountered any serious opposition. It was only really 1 division of paratroopers. And one of the points that James made in his talk was that Foggia Airport was really strategically vital. And once the Allies had got Foggia, the airfields, and I think there were more than 10, then really that was good enough from a strategic point of view. The political merit of going up to Rome, which Churchill favors as a showpiece, but actually from a strategic point of view, Foggia is all that was needed. And the other point, of course, is that the Italian campaign was just pure carnage. Anyway, Richard, you also had the privilege of listening to Mr. Holland. He was speaking in Windsor. You haven't had a chance to examine the book in great detail. You've had a preliminary read. So what is your conclusion about what James Holland's main points were? I think you probably heard more or less the same things as I did.
Yeah, that's correct. You saw him on Tuesday. I saw him the next day. He was very passionate in his presentation, and there's some very emotional elements to the story, of course. And as you say, he's changed his style, adapted his style slightly, where he's using personal contemporary accounts, so reliant on, as they were written at the time, letters home or diaries from various sources, Canadian or German, and in a few cases British. So the ones that we are aware of and that we helped James add in were contemporary accounts of men who served in the Royal Irish Fusiliers. The bookends of the story, as you said, were starting the Salerno time, early September, the battle, very difficult battle for a week there on the beaches and the big breachhead. And the other end of the bookend of the story of that autumn into winter of 1943 in Italy was the Canadian issues at Ortona, north of the Moro River, so that 3-month period. And so he actually started his presentation with some indications of what happened at Ortona, which we know about, but not everyone does. Canadians very much do know about it, and came back and added in the stories of Salerno and the other parts of the battle period.
Absolutely. What makes this book unusual is a lot of attention is paid in the Italian campaign to Cassino, not much to anything else. Now, James, 2 years ago, published a book about Sicily, which I think has highlighted that campaign. But the period between September 1943 to the end of the year, even Salerno itself doesn't get much attention. But actually, the Adriatic campaign, which is going to come, we're going to be covering in future episodes of this, was a very bitter, very serious campaign, but just gets no attention at all. And it culminated, or the final part of it was the Canadians being involved in the Battle of Ortona. Just a little bit on the countryside. We did the journey, didn't we, in the summer? We took the ferry from Messina over to the toe of Italy near Reggio de Calabria, and then we drove north. Interesting. Just share what that was like now.
Yes, as you know, very hot time of the year. We did it. Very similar time. Well, actually, July to September is a different temperature. But we drove on the ferry, crossed the straits. The actual crossing was around 30 minutes sailing time. And we read accounts, personal accounts from that time. And I think the crossing to Reggio, and in our case, Villa San Giovanni on Calabrian Peninsula, very similar. There was drive on, dock, drive off for the motor transport elements of those who went across. So the crossing itself by the military infantry was Baytown, 3rd of September. But when the follow-up resources went over, they drove on, drove off, almost like we did. So when we arrived on the other side, Villa San Giovanni, I mean, now there's autostradas all the way up, and we drove in a single day from Calabria to Cosenza, about 100 miles north of the ferry area, still in Calabria. And the autostrada, of course, now goes through tunnels and other things. But obviously in 1942 September, a lot of mountain roads, lots of mountainous areas. And the Germans weren't fighting in their withdrawal, of course. They were using explosions and other ordnance to destroy roads. So it was quite a slow progress for the 8th Army in that area.
So let's talk about a little bit more about the book. I mean, certainly the countryside, that was the main opponent for the 8th Army. The casualty rate only had practically no casualties on the actual landing itself, and very few casualties as they advanced north. And they were suffering probably more from heat and malaria than they were from the Germans, or the Germans were being persistently difficult because they were destroying the roads and the infrastructure, and they were practicing a scorched earth policy, which was going to become more intense. So the Italian civilians were certainly getting more and more affected. Now, in the book, and one of the great things about the book from our point of view is the inclusion of the extracts from the letters of Lawrence Franklin Vale, who was an officer in the 1st Battalion of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, the Fogs, which was in the Irish Brigade, which landed in the mainland at the end of September with the 78th Division. But these letters, and he refers to the story, because this book covers the period beyond the September right to the end of the year. These letters are really amazingly written in real time, practically every day, right up until the middle of May, to his wife. Tell us about Lawrence Franklin Vale and the letters, and how you managed to have copies of them that we've uploaded up to the Irish Brigade website.
We were lucky in that respect, and very important historical documents, unpublished when we saw them in 2012. And the initial contact came from the daughter of Lawrence Franklin Vale, who lived in Melbourne. And Lawrence himself was born in Melbourne in 1910. So he was an Australian citizen, even though he had moved to the United Kingdom in the 1930s. He was actually at some point a member of the Melbourne Cricket Club. So his name is listed in the museum of the MCG, obviously a very important civic building and sporting building in Melbourne, which I visited a number of years ago. But the letters themselves, so we were contacted with Olive, his wife, Lawrence Franklin Vale's wife. We were contacted by Val, his daughter, who was actually 2 years of age in 1943. And there were letters sent from Laurie himself to Olive, his wife, back in Northern Ireland. So Lawrence had been commissioned into the Royal Irish Fusiles in 1940. When the Fogs, the 1st Battalion, went out to North Africa in 1942, he stayed in the depot in Northern Ireland, so actually didn't go out. and actually didn't join them for the Sicilian campaign. But obviously the casualties were rather large in both campaigns. And he wasn't actually a regular officer, pre-war, that is. So perhaps the level of staffing or the high-level infantry leaders were all regulars at this point, even though there's casualties in both campaigns. But so Lawrence stayed back at the depot until August 1943.
So he came out in 43, and it's really from August 43. He starts off, one of his first letters is from a city in Sicily. And then the writing letters saying it's all very green and lots of malaria, but very nice. And then those are continued. And Olive, his wife, kept the letters. So how did we get access to them, Richard?
Yeah, just to clarify, the first letter that was written was on the 12th of August, when it actually was sailing out of the United Kingdom to North Africa. But yeah, we got hold of them through the fact that Val, his daughter, held them through those many years. Olive, who had been written to, had held them, passed to her daughter Val. And I was lucky enough to be in Australia very soon after the first contact was made by email with us. So I visited actually the partner of Val, Peter Fry, who was in New South Wales. I was visiting my uncle there, and I was able to view the original letters, and Peter Fry and Val Franklin Vale very kindly had transcribed all those letters and passed them over to us. So we were able to not only see copies of the originals, but have it already transcribed for us. And we got their permission to add it to our website in 2012. In fact, there were nearly 100 letters overall.
Yes, and you can read them on the Irish Brigade website, www.irishbrigade.co.uk. We made contact with Lawrence Franklin Vale's granddaughter, Margaret, haven't we? So you've recently been in touch with, haven't you?
It's Catherine, actually, Catherine Lynch.
Sorry, Catherine Lynch, yes.
Yeah, so his wife, Olive, I got confused a little bit earlier. Valerie, his daughter, Catherine Lynch, his granddaughter, who had actually lived in England in the recent past. And yeah, I don't think she was really fully aware of the significance of the relationship of her grandfather with the armed forces. I'm sure she knew about the story, but she said she lived in London. But Catherine herself, Catherine Lynch, Laurie's granddaughter, I actually met in Casino in 2014, so a couple of years after I've met Peter Fry, and she was visiting the cemetery for the first time in Casino. Sorry, that was running ahead of myself, but actually Laurie's buried at Casino Cemetery, and we were able to have a chat there. And then in 2016, I visited Australia again and actually met Val this time and Peter in Melbourne, and that was very excellent meeting. Unfortunately, Val died of cancer soon after my visit. She had some long-term cancer problems, but it was so very nice to meet Valerie and hear stories about her mother. She didn't know Laurie because she was only 2 when her father died. So it was very nice to meet them.
So we made the contact, and we hope that we will be having renew and refreshing, maybe person-to-person contact at some point, as the 80th anniversary commemorations of the Italian campaign move ahead. So we're looking forward, obviously, this year, Ortona, and then next year, Anzio, and then Cassino, and more beyond. So, Richard, thank you very much for coming to see us today. You'll be back in due course in another episode of This Week in the Italian Campaign. So thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone.
So that's it for This Week in the Italian Campaign. We will be back in 7 days' time. So until then, from everybody here, it's goodbye, good luck, and God bless you all.